with little more ado, I'm going to introduce the 4 of them. The first will be Catarina de Albuquerque, and who is, I didn't know this, was the first UN Special Rapporteur on the human rights to safe drinking water. And if you don't know what a UN rapporteur is, basically they're the advocates, they're the independent experts. And I turn to them more and more because they really do know their stuff. It's extraordinary knowledge which they have, usually built up over many years. We've got another Green Party woman, I should say, from France this time, Célia Blauel, who's the Deputy Mayor of Paris. I came across her works in Paris in November, quite an extraordinary achievement which Paris put on, not just on the intergovernmental level, which was interesting in all kinds of different ways, but also on the mayoral level, taking it down a step, taking it down to the level where ordinary people could interact, and where the great politicians said, well, okay, we can get 1.5% perhaps in 20 years or whatever it is, and then you knew where they were going to fail, 400 mayors turned up and say, 1.5%? No, we can do 5% now. And it was a completely different vibe. It was a completely different experience to hear real people who are involved in day-to-day politics saying, yes, we can do things. And so thank you very much for coming, and I look forward very much to hearing what you say. Ben Naceur, who's Director of Sustainability International Energy Agency. We always thought the International Energy Agency was only to do with nuclear power, and, well, it was for a long time, frankly, and sort of fossil fuels and whatever. They've turned a double somersault in the last few years, and I think finally the IEA is understanding the place for renewables and also the potential for it to go very much further, very much faster. So thank you very much for coming. And lastly, we have Jennifer. Jennifer Sara, is it, or Sarah? Sorry. Senior Director of Global Practice on Water with the World Bank. Now, I've had my problems with the World Bank. Many people have had problems with the World Bank, but I think Jennifer may be, again, we kick them. I mean, that's what we do. We have to kick them because they don't get it. And now, finally, they're beginning to understand. I mean, there's a lot of them who don't still, and we have to keep kicking them, but maybe Jennifer she's one of the good guys anyway. So, and we will help her kick the people who she needs to kick, because there are plenty of those as well. Thank you very much indeed all for coming. Now, each of you get your 2 minutes, and please no more than 2 minutes, because we're already running behind. But just say, I mean, I'm not even going to ask you a very specific question, except in your each in your area, you can see the answers to the water climate nexus, if you like. You see it very much from a sort of equality, from a sort of human point of view, I understand.
One of the things that we think, and you said what I was doing in the past, now in the present, I'm the executive chair of a global partnership which is called Sanitation and Water for All. And one of our guiding principles, which is one of the fundamental principles of the SDGs, is the elimination of inequalities. And we know that climate change affects those who are the most vulnerable the most. We know of studies. There is a recent study by UNICEF showing that also the most vulnerable are not only those who are most affected, but they are also those who are less resilient and who have more difficulties to recover from one extreme weather event after the other. So it seems that we have divergent forces. SDG tells us eliminate inequalities, climate change comes and exacerbates them, right? So when you look, for example, which I did, at how shall I say it? When countries outlined what actions they intended to take in the context of climate change, I tried to see, okay, where do you address inequalities? I found 3 of these submissions where they look at inequalities: Jordan, Bolivia, and Sudan. So we need much more of that. We need that countries put the elimination of inequalities at the center when they mitigate, when they adapt to climate change. And then I can talk maybe in a second round about what we are doing at SWA, with many here in the room, including with some of those who are here on the planet, on the panel, and on the planet, to address inequalities, to address the financing gap, to bring political will around the table. Okay, I wanted to respect the time.
Thank you. Thank you. Célia, let's bring you in right now. Okay, so you're an elected politician. What did you learn from that Paris experience? I mean, especially how you could translate things into reality for ordinary people. Are there lessons there which Paris taught you?
Well, from that specific experience that we had last year at COP21 in Paris, I think I will have 3 main lessons. First, that cities are definitely committed to face climate change issue, and that sometimes when I'm here in panels, I see people saying we have to find concrete solutions. So I have to say, we cities, humbly, we are 10 years of experiencing that solution, so have a look at what we're doing, and that commitment is very important. Second lesson was to be that specific moment we had show also that we can have the dialogue between international community and the local government level, and that was really interesting to have that real dialogue with the parties, with the UN delegation. And the third lesson would be that this was a tremendous, for me, really inspiring political momentum. As I was telling to you just before we started that panel, it was COP21, but it was also some weeks after the terror attack in Paris. So definitely having all that mayors meeting, discussing about public policy, seeing how many so much women and men convinced that we're not just tackling climate change, talking about temperature, but really, as the Moroccan ministry said, we are questioning, putting into question like the whole society model we're living in. And I can tell you, if you still had doubt, there are some politicians ready to make long-term policy and work for the future generations. So definitely that was the 3 lessons I had. And in Paris, we are really committed to that, because climate is definitely a big issue. As a deputy mayor, I'm in charge actually of climate, sustainable development, and also water. So we definitely have linked and make that interconnection that we're all talking about SDG climate action, because it's definitely the only way on building that, well, to me, sustainable, more equal city that we have to build in the future.
It occurs to me, I just want to follow up. It occurs to me sometimes that the climate change is almost like a red herring. So if we dealt with all the components of climate change, we wouldn't have to talk about climate change. So Paris is dealing a lot with the traffic pollution. You deal with the traffic pollution, you then automatically deal with a lot of the emissions which go into climate change. And so maybe we have been looking slightly in the wrong direction, as if we've had this one enormous problem when actually it's just a set of smaller problems, which if we deal with those, then we're going to get a much closer thing to it. Is there a sense that climate, especially after the atrocities and whatever, that climate has gone off the agenda, and that much more sort of real, tangible environment can be now addressed?
I think actually it's easier now to link everything, but it's true that now when I have to talk to the everyday people in Paris, I'm starting on how we are changing their life, their everyday life, to then link it to the climate issue. And actually people understand that much and more. When it's about water, for example, as we are here, going beyond from the air pollution thing that I could talk also about, but water for us in Paris is a real political issue for now 10 years. We decided to place water as a common good that we have to preserve. In the first political act we had was to take back public control on water. We have now a 100 public-run company on water. And the idea is to say, for instance, we are working for quality. That would be a big issue in the future. Working for quality for us is to make a prevention policy. We're working, for instance, on the underground resources with farmers, that they don't pollute anymore the ground that goes in the water. But by doing that, we're also reducing soil pollution, air pollution, and building a new local economy for then, in the end, providing food to the city. Because right now, Paris, this is another climate adaptation that we have to work on. We are really dependent on outside and exportation for food, so we want to make a circle thing. And when you say to people in Paris, I protect your water, at the same time I grow food, organic and local, and at the same time actually I'm tackling climate change. This makes a lot of sense, and also talks beyond environmental about solidarity and building another society, as many of you already said.
Excellent, excellent, excellent. Jennifer, come in, please. Okay, World Bank and water, a long history, shall we say, and some of which has been very successful, and others you got slightly wrong. Is there a new thinking in the bank which we should know about?
Well, I think yes, there is. I don't know if it's a new thinking, but what we've done is really embrace both the SDG agenda and the climate change agenda, and we've created this water global practice, which looks as a vision for water secure world for all. I think what's very important here is we're acting in 3 areas. The first one is supporting our client governments on the whole water agenda, an integrated water agenda. So how can we leverage the $25 billion in investment, both on looking at water security and helping governments develop national programs, developing the institutions, the information system, and the infrastructure to address water security, but also looking at service delivery. And what the SDGs are asking us is to look at universal access. So how do you move beyond the ring fence projects into national programs, and again, supporting institutions and policies that can deliver water and sanitation services for cities, for farmers, for industry. So that's the first part, which is our core business, with very much supporting governments doing that. The second one I think is really, really important is the analytical agenda, and how do you put prices? How do you wake up the ministers of finance? And how do you start saying that the climate agenda and the water agenda are the same agendas? We know economic growth and poverty reduction are very thirsty businesses. It requires a huge amount of water for urban development, for agriculture, for energy production. We just completed a report, a study called High and Dry, looking at the costs of climate change on the water cycle, and we see that there's a huge impact of water scarcity. That will be the biggest change, and it's quantifying that in the impact on GDP growth. You have 6% reduction in GDP growth in some countries because of the effects of climate change on water. These are the types of numbers that help the ministers of finance wake up and say, look, we really need to invest in it. And finally is the area of partnerships, and we're delighted to be a secretariat to support this high-level panel on water at the global level, the political will, but then how do you translate the political will to implementation at the local level?
Thank you. Just a quick follow-up question. I mean, you've upped your spending on climate change enormously over the last few years, and jolly good. What about your spending on water and sanitation? Has that gone up commensurately?
So actually, it has gone up, but let me also, so last year, in fact, we had huge programs in sanitation. We invested $2.5 billion in sanitation, but let's remember that the governments are the ones who drive the investment program. So the governments created a country partnership strategy with the World Bank and prioritized which areas they'd like to invest in. So a lot of this analytical work and lobbying is so important for the governments to prioritize sanitation.
Are you saying that the governments themselves don't get it? They don't understand?
Some governments do, and some are getting it quicker than others.
Do you want to name names? Do
I want to name? Well, I will definitely put India, Prime Minister Modi on sanitation, fantastic. Yeah. The Swachh program that he's done, $22 billion investing in India on rural sanitation, and he's investing in behavior change and latrines. So again, how do you piggyback on that?
As a World Bank, what kind of return do you think India will get from that increased investment in sanitation?
Well, again, the returns on public health benefits, but the most important thing I think now returns on sanitation is we're looking at the linkage between sanitation, nutrition, and childhood stunting. And I think more and more is showing that the interaction across all of these sectors and catching the children and reducing malnutrition and stunting will have an impact, intergenerational impact.
So an enormous knock-on effect. Yeah. Ben, I mean, is it Ben Naceur or Ben Naceur? So Ben Naceur. Okay, energy, water as one, as I always think of it as one. Is that a conceptual change which has taken place in the agency as well? I mean, is there now a sort of much greater understanding of the linkages between, say, climate and water?
No, we've been working for some time on the linkages. As you know, climate and energy are very much related. 2/3 of the emissions come from the energy sector. So that is quite a big number, and we need to sort out the energy situation if we want to find solution for the climate. But I wanted to go back to the linkages between the water and the energy. And if you take the SDG 6 and the SDG 7, you could almost put them paragraph per paragraph between the two. And I would put them along 5 key elements. The first one is access. We heard about the problem with access of water in the energy sector, it's even bigger. Today, 1.2 billion people do not have access to electricity. 3 billion people do not have access to modern energy sources. And also, the same people that don't have access to electricity don't have access to water. So we may want to solve both problems at the same time for those same people. So that's the first point. The second one is about clean water, and we have the same thing about clean energy. Today, we heard this morning about the 900 people dying of diarrhea and on a daily basis. If you look at the number of premature deaths due to air quality, either indoor or outdoor, the number is even more staggering. It's 7 million people every single year dying prematurely due to air quality. The third one is about how efficiently we use resources, whether it's from the water or the energy sector. Today, we look at the energy intensity in many of the emerging economies. It's far from where it should be. We are not using it very effectively. The fourth one is about infrastructure. The infrastructure, we have to stop thinking in silos between energy and water. These are very much interrelated. And finally, the fifth one is about capacity building and innovation. And we need to have, we were very encouraged in Paris to have the mission innovation announcement, the Breakthrough Energy Coalition. We need to have the same thing for water. And I'm very pleased actually to be in this panel. It's very different from the energy sector in terms of diversity, gender diversity, because if you are in the energy sector, yeah, absolutely. So anyway, these are drawing parallel. And finally, a last final point is that energy needs water and water needs energy.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Do you want to come up here? You know, is it the silo thinking which is sort of wrecking the whole thing at the moment? Is that
well, the silo thinking, I think things are changing a lot. Let me just add to something that Jennifer was saying when she was talking about the benefits. I agree with everything, the benefits for India. It's everything she said. Of course, it's also crucial for women's rights, for gender equality, for girls' access to education, and for their dignity. And it's really, and I think this is something, I'm not saying that health doesn't touch you on a day-to-day basis, but these simple things of being secure when you go to the toilet, being able to go to school, seeing your children being able to go to school because there are toilets, it's something that touches your life on a day-to-day basis. And I think, yes, it's a question of dignity, well, and a question of rights, of course. Now, on the silos, I feel from our perspective in SWA that the SDGs are providing us with an excellent opportunity, an excellent excuse to do things that we should have been doing before, namely breaking the silos. And I see myself, on behalf of SWA, talking more and more with, for example, the partnership on the global, how are you called? Sustainable Energy for All. Sustainable Energy, no, not you, the others. Sustainable Energy for All. Or talking with the Sun Alliance, which is the alliance that looks at nutrition, the Global Partnership for Education, the Partnership for Maternal Health. And we are looking at the linkages between all the different sectors. What can we do together? But also, following on what Jennifer was saying on financing, and also the things that you were referring to, silos, and then quoting the previous speakers, Minister Nomvola from South Africa and Henk from the Netherlands. You were saying partnership, collaboration. You have to say it 3 times. I think that this is exactly what we are doing with the partnership that we have in SWA. And we are bringing together the different stakeholders, the governments, of course, the donors, multilateral, bilateral, including the bank, but UN agencies, etc. Also the research and learning community and the civil society organizations. We are bringing them all together and trying to find solutions to make sure that everyone gets access to water, sanitation, and hygiene by 2030, in a world affected by climate change. So next year, the World Bank is hosting an SWA meeting of ministers of finance, because we know that talking is very good and important, that it is important to change policies, and we work with the sector ministers. But we, as you were saying, Jennifer, it's crucial to have the finance ministers in the room for them to understand the benefits and the crucial importance of bridging the financing gap for the sector. So this is, we are bringing them together, and of course, personally, I would like us to use the April 2017 meetings, because we will have for the sector ministers and for the finance ministers, to discuss these issues in the context of wider global issues, including climate change.
Célia, come in here. I mean, how do these sort of slightly abstract SDGs, how do they translate back down into policy in Paris? And do you feel that you're actually referring to them in what you do? I mean, are they reflecting what you're doing?
I think, to me, when you go really at the local level, SDG for me would be like a really comprehensive roadmap of all the things we have to do, and as you're saying, breaking silos. So I have to hit 3 times as well. Sorry, I didn't do it on purpose. So working for the SDGs for me is as much to implement a real right to water in Paris, but also in the international solidarity program we have, because the right to water in the next decade is going to be an issue in the south, obviously, but in the north also. We have now a study in Paris to see the vulnerabilities of the city of Paris facing climate change and the scarcity of natural resources. And definitely, we will have some troubles. We saw California, we see what's happening in Spain, so we all have to take this into account. And I think what you said, we have to convince people, because it seems so really far away for a lot of people. And there are 2 things to do, and then, okay, I have to say 3 times, collaborate. But definitely we have to go beyond the codes that we know in the way of how we are thinking, innovating, finding solutions. For us in Paris, it means that, for instance, we changed the water governments. Now, the board of directors in water of Paris that I'm chairing, we have experts, we have independent association, NGOs that vote with us, which is not always really funny in my everyday life, but it helps to change the way you're thinking. We build also with farmers, with agriculture unions, which is really, really difficult, especially in France, because it's a hard lobby, but we need to break that thing, and we need to work together, and we need to work even more with our national and European level, which are really stuck in really old way of managing that kind of issue, and this is something we have to break really quickly. And then comes on finance. I think what you said is really important. We have to have the real cost of what is going on right now. I always take the issue of quality. In France, we have a big trouble with water quality, because France is very much in love with pesticides. Like, I think we are like the worst in Europe, using too much chemicals, and all our water underground resources are getting polluted. As the chair of a water company, if I put money to give subsidy to the farmers to change the way they are growing food, it costs me 1 subsidy, and it's actually less costly than building a new drinkable plant. If I take the old way we are doing, we give subsidy to farmers to grow intense production. Then the water bill users are paying to take that pollution out of the water, so this is not a cost. Then you find a cost in health, because we're going to have that. And then it's a real high cost for biodiversity, environment, that we still don't know how much it costs. So definitely we have to shift towards something completely new. And as most of you already said, it means also political courage. And we need that a lot in the next decades.
No, good point. Sara, I mean, can you actually give, as the World Bank, can you support governments which have got political courage? And I mean, it's a 2-way thing, isn't it? I mean, you are in a position where you can tell a prime minister or a president, if you do this, you've got the analysis, you've got the work. Why isn't it getting through? That's what I don't understand.
Well, thank you for that question. I mean, let's come back. Finance. So let me just talk.
Come on.
Put another 3 there, right? And I think on finance, and I think the minister the other day also raised this issue. The first issue on finance is, how do you spend money more effectively and efficiently. The amount of wastage that is already in the sector is tremendous. How many non-revenue water in so many cities, farmers wasting water. So the first thing is, how do you actually reduce water waste and improve efficiency? How do you ensure the financial sustainability of any water utility irrigation organization that you put out there? So how do you, again, coming back to valuing water, pricing water, ensuring that water is paid for? The second one, though, is there is a lot of money out there. And how do, again, countries say, we can't access this money? So what is missing? So how do you support countries, build the capacity, help them formulate bankable projects so they can access the Green Climate Fund, they can access the World Bank? We have so much money that we've committed, and the countries have committed, and it's just not getting spent because it takes so long to get the bidding documents, to get the projects on the ground.
One of our speakers earlier said that the Green Climate Fund really has very little money in it for sanitation and things like that. Is that right?
So that's another thing. So again, the water community, how do you then put the sanitation and the water agenda, the adaptation agenda, into the climate agenda? And we know the climate agenda is a water agenda. So again, it's how do you then formulate projects, become eligible for the funds that exist. So I think that's work that's in progress that we think is very important. And again, we do need to leverage additional funds. And again, additional funds can only be leveraged when there are strong policies and institutions in place to absorb the funds and spend them wisely.
Do you have a sort of round ballpark figure on how much money is needed just to keep up with what we have at the moment? I mean, obviously populations are growing and cities are growing and the problems are, I mean, is there a sort of a sum of money which...
We talk from billions to trillions, and we're trying very, very hard to quantify, because for many years we looked at water and sanitation, but now when we look at the broader SDG 6 goals and the interrelated water goals, I think there's quite a bit of work going on trying to quantify that.
Yeah, really.
The numbers are just tremendous.
Yeah, yeah. Do you want to come in, Ben?
So on silos, I'm just going to give an example of what happens if we don't do things right. I'll go back to the 2008 time where we had extraordinary oil prices, $147, biofuel investments, and people investing in biofuels. As a result, we had a problem with food prices also going up. So this was a result of people thinking in silos. Now, if we do things right, we can integrate much better renewable and water. Renewable is a fantastic opportunity. We have seen prices going down quite significantly over the last 4 or 5 years. Now we are competing head-to-head with fossil fuel prices in power generation. So renewables are fantastic, but we need to find a way to store them, to store energy when we don't use it. So one way to store it is to use pump water storage. So we need to integrate water and energy and avoid those silos.
Is that, I'm just on that water storage thing, is that, you're not a funding agency, but is that a real potential game changer?
That's a game changer. I think that this would be bridging the gap until we find ways of having battery storage that goes by a factor of 2 or 3. So in that time, we need to use this pumped water storage.
Come in, please.
Political will, political will, political will.
No,
we were talking about it before, and I think that the panel, the high-level panel by the World Bank and the UN, I think can have a tremendous impact in raising political will, because what Jennifer was saying, and I think that what we often see is that the money is there, but then you don't see governments prioritizing the sector and devoting. I was in my capacity as rapporteur, I remember being in a country. I will not mention the country. No, I can mention the country. Senegal. I was in Senegal. I'm not the rapporteur any longer. And I was in Senegal, and I was talking with someone and asking, but why don't you invest more in the sector? And then there was somebody telling me, yes, because in the health sector, you see the building. In your sector, everything is buried underground. So for the government, for the minister to inaugurate something, it's not visible. So I think it's making sure that the political will arises, and I think that your panel, but of course your panel has to work with partnerships, and of course, and we do that, like ours, because you are at a super high level, which is fantastic in terms of visibility, but then it's the ministers, the sector ministers, and also the ministers of finance who can make the change, who can make the investments, who can make, and we have seen among our partner countries at SWA that those countries, that where there is a will, there is a way. Meaning, if you prioritize the sector, if you have a plan for it, if you budget for it, then you will get support and things will start moving. Look at South Africa. You are taking a picture. Look at South Africa.
She's taking 3 pictures.
Now, I would like just to take 20 seconds to say 2 things. Join SWA, those of you who are not our partners. Number 2, make sure that there is more integration, more articulation within governments of those people who work on climate change and those who work on water, to make sure that the agendas are integrated, that we are not creating a wider gap, but that we are bringing things together and are taking actions to make, to mitigate climate change, to adapt to climate change, while making sure that we meet the MDGs, SDGs. Sorry, I'm an old woman.
Célia, but you would say also that cities, it doesn't need the governments, it doesn't need these top-level things. It can be brought down to a sort of urban level. Is the solution there just as much as it is in getting the governments out of their silos?
Solution in the cities, you mean? That we can do without national government?
People have, we always tend to, especially journalists, we look at governments, we want action from governments, but actually, I mean, 70%, 80% of all the climate change decisions to be made will be made at a city level or even lower. Is that, you know...
I would say this is a wonderful question for me because, you know, one of the book Mayor Hidalgo and I read, and most of the people in the city of Paris, is the book by Benjamin Barber saying, If Mayors Rule the World.
Yeah.
So yeah, definitely, I think cities are key for everything. No, what is true is that cities, we also always say it, have a big responsibility in that climate change issue because we are like 70% of GHG emission, responsible for the scarcity of natural resources. So we have that big responsibility and we are really at the front lines. But at the same time, it is true, and I'm exchanging a lot with the other deputy mayor all around the world within the C40 networks. We are in the front line, and so we are acting, and we're acting not for more than 10 years in trying to implement a solution. That's why sometimes also we have the feeling that things are not going fast enough for us. That's true, because when it's talking about water and climate, it's true. Right now, we are doing things in mitigation to mitigate GHG emission on the infrastructure, but also to develop geothermal things, how to cool the city, for instance, with a non-drinkable water system that we have in Paris. We are working for years now on adaptation, how we're going to assure security for water supply in the city, but also a real right to water, whatever your economical background is and your situation. We are working on environmental issue also, and now we are also working on water as a key element to build the sustainable city. And this is also a really good way to make public opinion work with us. For instance, is to see Paris is going to be hotter and hotter in the summer in the next decades. So we are trying to see how we can use water to cool the city. We have many, many different technical experimentation, but especially now we're working how we can swim in the River Seine, which is like a big issue that we're fighting a lot in Paris right now. Everybody thinks it's crazy. I think here at Stockholm it's nothing crazy, but it seems a bit crazy. But at the same time, this is like a really good mean to make people think about what does that mean, water in the sustainable city. Why it's so important to preserve that vital resource to everybody, and how it helps also to mobilize stakeholders that we're not used to work with. Even, I mean, states have make a lot of mistakes and things, but cities as well. And right now we learn how to work differently, how to build coalition that are from companies, from associations, NGOs, politicians, all the ones that believe in that new world we are trying to build. So this is really interesting, but it's true that sometimes city feels like, okay, go a bit faster, please.
Jennifer, did you feel there's a whole new agenda here? I mean, like, instead of trying to persuade these stupid, wonderful governments to get their acts together, go direct to the mayors, go direct to the council. Can you do that?
I mean, definitely, fully embrace. I'm endorsing this whole agenda. Just recently, I was in Lilongwe in Nairobi, and we go and work with the municipal authorities and the water utilities, and they're looking at solving the water issue, providing universal access to everybody in the city. And all of a sudden, they're faced with an issue of there's no water. And all of a sudden, they have to go outside the city, and they're dealing with sectors they've never dealt with. They have to deal with farmers. They have to look at bulk water supply. So it really is, the silo breaking is happening every single day, where cities before weren't faced with droughts or floods, and how do you manage these extremes? Even Sao Paulo, when we go talk to Dursun Kelman in Sabesp, he's saying, I need to figure out a way to negotiate with the farmers upstream so they use less water, so I have water available for municipal water supply. So it really is a fascinating agenda, a multi-sectoral agenda at every single level.
This is exciting. Ben, come on. Come on.
Okay, so we have just published a book called Energy Technology Perspectives to 2050, where the focus was on cities. And two main lessons from that. First is that the solution will come from greater collaboration from the governments, the cities, and the private sector. That's the first one. The second thing is that if we look at the system cost from going from today's path to a much cleaner pathway is actually could be cheaper than if we consider the whole system. Just going to take the example of transport that, Célia, you were mentioning. If I take the total system cost, which would be cars, which would be the public infrastructure, and then also all the parkings and so on, this, in a decarbonized world, this is much cheaper, actually, than in a carbonized world. So if you look at the whole system and you get those three actors all working together, you get much more efficient solutions. And that is through breaking silos.
Thank you. We've run out of time, but very good talking. Well done.